spend a lot of effort, or they hire a recruitment agency which costs a lot.
So good morning everyone, and thank you for coming out so early. I'm Nicola Willis and I'm the CEO of ChargeNet. I lead a dedicated team who've been building EV infrastructure for a decade now, and it's great to welcome our ministers, Minister Willis, Minister Bishop and Minister Watts here this morning. At ChargeNet, our role is simple. We build EV infrastructure so Kiwis can move the way that they choose to. And fleet electrification doesn't just happen on the roads, it happens in places like this, where you shop, where you play, where you work. We're genuinely excited about what the ministers are here to announce, and I'd like to welcome the Honourable Nicola Willis to commence the announcement this morning.
Good morning everyone, and thank you for coming out to Petone this morning to see what is one of many charges that we want to see around the country, because driving an electric vehicle is a choice that many New Zealanders are making, but we know that for more New Zealanders to make that choice, they need to have reliable infrastructure that means that when they take their EV on a journey, they know they can top up the charge at a range of locations. So investing in that infrastructure is something that the government has decided to prioritise, and we're really pleased to be here today to announce to you the next steps in rolling out more than 2,500 additional EV ChargeNets across the country. So Transport Minister Chris Bishop and Energy and Climate Change Minister Simon Watts joined me this morning, and we're going to announce that the number of public EV chargers around New Zealand is about to more than double. The government is investing just over 50 million in zero interest government loans, and this means that we are able to accelerate the rollout of chargers that the private sector would otherwise have led but would have done more slowly. I want to acknowledge that ChargeNet and Meridian Energy are bringing around $60 million in co-investment to ensure this rollout can be accelerated. As you know, the government has been keeping New Zealanders informed about our fuel situation as the conflict in the Middle East has developed. As I've assured you, we have sufficient stocks for now. We will provide an update at 1 o'clock today on what those fuel stocks are looking like, and we're continuing to work hard across diplomatic, commercial and industry channels to ensure that New Zealand has ongoing fuel supply. But of course, the current situation in the Middle East, the disruption to global oil flows, the soaring price at the pump has already served as a reminder to many New Zealanders that countries around the world that are exposed to international fuel markets do face risks. In New Zealand's case, around half our fuel comes from South Korea and nearly a third from Singapore. So when global supply chains are disrupted, as they are now, that exposure becomes really tangible for families and businesses who are feeling pain at the pump. So it is absolutely the case that over time, reducing our dependence on imported fossil fuels makes good economic sense for New Zealand. Of course, individual families will make their own choices about the vehicle that suits them and their circumstances, but we want purchasing an electric vehicle to be a valid choice in New Zealand. So today's announcement is not a response to the current situation globally. The work on this charging proposal has been underway for some time, but of course it has very direct relevance today. I understand that across the country, demand for electric vehicles has surged in recent weeks as more New Zealanders have been tipped into considering this choice. So Chris Bishop and Simon Watts will provide you some more details of this expansion. In short, I'd just say more EV chargers means more New Zealanders will have the confidence to switch to an EV when it's time to upgrade. And that means they'll be running on electricity that is cheap and, in New Zealand's case, renewable, produced right here at home. Unlike some countries in the world where when consumers go to fill up their EV, they may in fact be filling it with electricity that is not renewable. Here in New Zealand, we know it's a renewable, sustainable and affordable choice. So it's good for household budgets, it's good for our long-term energy security. And the government's initiative today, I would liken to what a previous national government did with the rollout of ultra-fast broadband infrastructure. By working with the private sector, we can get efficient delivery of infrastructure that allows for a really important technology to be taken up by more Kiwis. So with that, I'll hand over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Welcome to the hut, everyone. It's great to be here. Many people, I think, have thought about getting an electric vehicle, but we know from the research that people worry about range anxiety. They worry about running out of juice as they drive around our towns and cities, and that's where you need public charging infrastructure provided by ChargeNet, Meridian, and a range of other companies as well. So we are in a bit of a chicken and egg situation where the private sector, which has been investing in infrastructure, has been maybe a little bit more reticent than they otherwise would be as a result of the lack of demand, but also there's a lack of demand for electric vehicles because people are a little bit worried about the charging infrastructure. So the role of the government here is to step in the middle, and a bit like the ultra-fast broadband network, and partner with our private sector in order to accelerate the rollout of charging infrastructure around the country. And this is a genuine co-investment by the government, just over $50 million, with $60 million from Meridian and ChargeNet by way of zero interest concessionary loans. What the government used to do back when the EVs were in the early days, in the mid-2010s, 2015, 16, 17 and beyond, was we did simple grants to either companies or in some cases to councils or a range of other providers to roll out charging infrastructure. What we've moved to is a much more commercial and sophisticated, I would argue, model in which these zero interest loans, which will be repaid to the government over time with big upfront funding from the government, means that we can deploy at scale and get much more value for money from the investment that we are making. So all up, the investment is around 110 million, as I say, 52.7 from the Crown, 60 million from Meridian and ChargeNet for 2,500 or over 2,500 charges around the country. Important to note, around half in our urban areas, Auckland, Wellington, the Wellington region, like the Hutt and Upper Hutt, Christchurch, Dunedin, Hamilton, Tauranga, those big cities, and around half in more regional areas as well. And again, we get feedback that is very important as well, so that when people are doing that big summer roadie, they can do so confident that they'll be able to charge up on the way. So about half in the big cities, half in regional and rural areas. Also a mixture of different charging types. So this gets quite technical very quickly, and don't ask me to explain it. But basically you've got fast chargers like the ones behind us, which can charge, well, my little Nissan Leaf in about 15 to 20 minutes. The DC chargers, that's really important for when people need to, a bit like going to the petrol station, top up the car, get some juice into it. That's really important. So about half of them are DC chargers, and around half will be AC chargers, which are the slower chargers, which are more suitable, say, for shopping malls, for example, where people tend to spend a little bit longer and they can afford to take the time to do those charges. Overall cost to the Crown is around $20,000 per charge point, and once the repayments are factored in, the net cost to the Crown is about $10,000. So it's a quarter of what a direct grant would cost. So we are getting much better value for money than what we're used to in the moment. As Nicola says, the current fuel challenge is prompting many people we know to think about getting an EV, many people thinking about making the switch. This work was underway before the most recent events of the last 2 or 3 weeks. We've been working on this for quite some time. We obviously campaigned on as a party on 10,000 charge points by 2030, and this is part of that. So we've been working on this for a while, but it is fair to say that I think there's renewed interest and excitement about it in light of recent events. The other point I'd just quickly make before handing over to Simon is that it's not just about the investment in the infrastructure. Actually making sure we can roll them out quickly and efficiently is important as well. So very soon we will make the installation of EV chargers what's called a permitted activity under the Resource Management Act, which is basically a way of saying you will not need a resource consent in most circumstances to install an EV charger. It is quite frankly astonishing at the red tape, the cost and time and paperwork required by councils to put in place simple chargers in supermarkets and shopping malls and petrol stations and other places around the country where councils have demanded resource consents, consultation, endless red tape in order to put in place very simple things. So we're publishing a set of standards, and as long as companies installing EV chargers fit within the standards, then they will not need a resource consent. They will be a permitted activity under the RMA. That will save time and money on the installation. So look, it's not the biggest thing in the world, but it will make a real difference to ChargeNet and Meridian. I'm going to hand over now to Simon to extol the virtues of electric vehicles, and then we'll take some questions. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. Nicola, as Energy and Climate Minister, great to be here this morning. And even before the recent fuel increases that we've seen, owning an EV vehicle in New Zealand made strong financial sense. Electricity is cheaper than petrol, and especially now. And our grid is almightily powered by renewable energy, some 95% on a good day, geothermal, wind, hydro and solar. EVs also produce at least 60% less life cycle emissions than petrol vehicles. And what's interesting to see that Kiwis are already starting to make the shift to electric vehicles as a cost of living choice. As of February of this year, EV sales were up 10.5% on the previous year. And anecdotal evidence suggests that it is even a greater increase in the last few weeks as a result of the Middle East crisis, which is pushing fuel prices up. At a time when global fuel markets are volatile, that really matters. And New Zealand's electricity grid insulates EV drivers from those international power shocks in a way that petrol simply cannot. A better charging network across New Zealand is great for New Zealanders, and it means that New Zealanders can take advantage of that. More people are going to be able to start making the switch, which means lower household transport bills and fewer emissions. Both of these are good for Kiwi households, good for Kiwi businesses and good for Kiwis. I'll now hand over to Claire from ChargeNet.
Tēnā koutou katoa, my name's Claire Shaw, I'm from Meridian Energy. Feels very fitting to be announcing this here today at Pack and Save Petone, given that this is a place where people come for their everyday essentials, and that's what we want from the EV charging network, for something that's easy and for that people can get to every day. Meridian's very proud to be partnering with the government on this rollout. With the renewable energy advantage we have, of course it makes absolute sense to be as resilient as we possibly can. And this co-funding will help Meridian build significantly on the scale of the EV network that we've done so far. We'll be delivering at least 860 fast chargers as part of this project, and that gives Meridian and the confidence that we can help our customers make the switch. So thank you to Ministers Willis, to Ministers Watts and Bishop for this. We're looking forward to getting this done. Thank you.
So I won't keep you much longer. I think we just want to take the opportunity to thank the government for this NIF investment. It's important that in the commitment to work together over an extended time frame. It means we can plan ahead. This site opened in 2019 with 2 25 kilowatt chargers and now serves customers with 400 kilowatts of charging power. These are the kinds of sites New Zealanders need and deserve. We appreciate the government backing ChargeNet's Power Up vision. It's 1,700 new charging points nationwide by 2030. Our current plans show we'll have 200 more charging points in the ground before Christmas, and we've already opened the first site under this partnership. It really shows how committed everybody who's involved in this is to going from agreement to action with real urgency. For us, it's like the Minister's mentioned, people need confidence that when they travel around New Zealand that they can charge where they go and when they go. But also, as more of us electrify, we need to be able to provide electrification opportunities for those who don't have charging at home. So AC charging is going to be a new and exciting part of our ecosystem in New Zealand. We're here to provide a really simple service that's where you want it, when you want it. Overall, we're looking forward to increasing the pace of charger installs by a double. At the moment, in New Zealand, over the last 7 months, there are about 20 points a month going into the ground. ChargeNet alone will be putting 40 points a month into the ground when we reach the peak of the program. It's an awesome opportunity to give New Zealanders more choice now and in the coming decades. Again, I'd like to thank the ministers for their cooperation in pulling together this program and rethinking how to invest in electrification of New Zealand. We're now going to invite the ministers and those who want to stay and have a look to join us at the charge points and get these New Zealanders moving for the day. Thank you for your time this morning.
Great. And are you going to charge up your car?
Oh, I can do, yes, I can.
We've got to see the Bushmobile on camera. That's got to be part of the announcement. We're happy to take your questions.
What is the time frame for the announcement charges that have been announced today?
Next 3 to 4 years.
Okay. So 10,000 by 2030. So
Yep.
it's like that's a massive goal.
No, I would describe it as an ambitious stretch goal, and there is potential future. There's the potential in the future to expand the program. This is the initial $52.7 million investment alongside ChargeNet and Meridian, but there's the potential for future investment in the future.
What's your election policy?
No. But the announcement we're making today will bring the number of chargers around the country to 4,500, and of course there will be other companies and other providers doing charges on top of the co-investment announced by the government today. The campaign commitment was to get to 10,000 around the country by 2030. We're on the journey towards that. The 2030 is a number of years away. Yes, and we will, as I say, consider future investment around that as future budgets go. No, this is an exciting announcement today. We are more than doubling the number of public chargers around the country in the next 3 to 4 years by partnering with the private sector. It's a long-term, ambitious stretch goal, and 2030 is a few years away.
If it's cheaper to do it this way, then why not invest the same amount of money or similar amount of money so that you can get to that 10,000 faster?
Well, as I say, we will consider that future investment into the future. No, we will consider that future investment into the future.
You ended up pretty big demand destruction for EVs upon coming into government. There was a cost-neutral rebate scheme over time that you got rid of. And you can see everyone knows the stats in the EV update. You've got a tiny double a year, for the past 3 years. Do you at all regret that, given that the average New Zealand vehicle lasts like 14.8 years on the road? So every petrol vehicle sold right now will stay on the road for 15 years at least.
Well, a couple of points there. Number one, it wasn't cost neutral. It was actually costing taxpayers around $300 million. So not cost neutral at all. So in other words,
as taxing other car owners.
As well as taxing other car owners. So you're asking taxpayers to subsidise people to buy Teslas, which I do not think is a prudent. I do not think that is a prudent use of public money. Asking other taxpayers and people who can't afford EVs, tradies and farmers who simply can't make the switch to EVs, to pay more for their vehicles, to subsidise largely higher income earners to buy Teslas and other vehicles. So I do not think that was a good use of public money, which is why we scrapped the scheme. The economics of this, as Simon has pointed out, are really clear. EVs make sense for New Zealand. That's why people are buying them. That's why you're seeing demand surge, anecdotally at least, and we'll get the numbers in due course, but anecdotally, a lot of people are saying, well, rightio, with petrol at $3.20 a litre, maybe going a bit higher, I'm going to look at an EV, and that's completely sensible. That's the price mechanism in action. You don't need to subsidise EVs, they make sense. There's no need to do them.
Earlier I used the analogy of ultra-fast broadband, and I'd say to you that with ultra-fast broadband, the government saw it had a role in supporting the enabling infrastructure, but no one ever talked about, and then what we better do is provide a subsidy to people to buy a laptop or buy a cell phone. Actually, we viewed that as the choice of individuals. The government's role was to ensure that the infrastructure was there to support that choice.
After 1 over years, I think there's only been about 200 new charges coming around the country. Why is it not been rolling out faster?
Well, decisions around charging you might want to put to Denisha and the team here, but there have been charges being built around the country. The point is we want to accelerate that because we think EVs make sense for New Zealand, and we think the charging infrastructure is a legitimate area of government responsibility where we can help make a difference. So the announcement today is about accelerating that rollout and making it happen faster than it otherwise would have happened in a completely purely commercial sense. It goes back to that point I made right at the start, and I think the point Nicola's just made, which is people are reluctant to buy an EV because they're worried about running out of juice, and therefore that has a flow-on effect to the demand for the charging infrastructure, and the charging companies are reluctant to, or at least more reluctant than they otherwise would be, to roll them out. So we're about standing in the middle and trying to break that a bit.
Are you going to make those resource management changes?
They're going through literally as I speak, so I think early to mid-April off the top of my head. I think I've got early to mid-April in my head, so like next 2 or 3 weeks.
And that will need to be done in order for the
doesn't have to be done, but I mean, again, the team here will tell you about some of the challenges they faced in getting resource consents around the place. Not in every place, but very often a resource consent is required, and oftentimes can be quite burdensome and costly in time and money. Endless council rigmarole of, oh, we're not sure about this, we're going to have to, go out for notification and consult the community about this and that. I mean, these are actually, they're not that complicated, right? Like they're just basically putting in charges and petrol stations and supermarkets and things like that. So they're not that complicated, and again, this is the system we're moving to with the resource management changes, which is put in place standard requirements. As long as you're within the standard components and the technical details, you can get on with it. If you go beyond that, you'll need a resource consent. But I'm advised that in most cases, it will mean that EV chargers won't require resource consent. You can just go and get on with it. You have to tell the council you're doing it, but you can just go and get on with it. So it's a big step forward.
On resource management, are you looking at all at off-street residential parking? So people who don't have off-street parking but still might want an EV. Currently, most councils banning it.
Are you asking for a friend?
Is that it's banned in Wellington entirely? You just can't do it in Wellington. You can't even ask for resource consent. Is that something the government will look at over time?
Yeah,
I'd
have to check the exact specs of what we're doing with the permitted activity charging thing I just talked about, and see whether or not it includes that or not. But that's a good piece of homework for me to go away and look at. It may include some of that, or it may require a slight tweak. That's not an EV.
That's a petrol vehicle, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
That's costing when he fills up at the pump.
Have you done any modelling as to how much this will drive up demand, and also the modelling on the impact on the electricity network?
No, in relation to both cases. The grid can cope with this. There's no doubt about that. Those are ultimately relationship and liaison decisions for ChargeNet Meridian when it comes to dealing with the electricity network providers. In relation to demand, no, it's basically because it's impossible to work it out. We know from the ECA research and years of experience overseas that when you've got good provision of public charge points, it removes a barrier for people to buy an EV. We have some of the lowest number of public chargers per head of population in the OECD, and we want to change that. That's part of the reason why we're here.
Not necessarily these specific charges putting extra pressure on the network, but the uptake of EVs in general drives demand.
Oh, right.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the exciting things that's happening in New Zealand. I'm sure Simon will talk to that, is that we've seen a huge uplift in investment in solar energy generation, wind energy generation, and that's to meet the increasing electrification of our economy. So this is an example of that happening.
Yeah, one of the actions that I took late last year was to write to all the electricity distribution businesses. They're the entities that control the network here in local communities, sending a clear signal that they need to create more capacity in that grid to be able to handle the increased demand. What we are seeing is that there is a significant uptake of that demand. But going back to the question around the price point in terms of the modelling, average household savings in terms of charging an EV versus a petrol vehicle can be up to around $2,000 per year. So it is absolutely not inconsequential in the context of household budgets that an EV vehicle in terms of that versus fuel makes sense.
Yeah, but we're also seeing spiking power prices because we don't have enough hydro dams over winters, and we don't have that LNG facility yet. So what's happening in dry winters when people need to charge the power supply?
Yeah, well, the reality is that we've made announcements in regards to the dry year effect in terms of fuel support. You're also seeing quite a significant uptake of residential solar as well. When you're using solar off the roof to charge an EV vehicle, it's even significantly higher savings than the numbers that I've quoted, and you're seeing quite a significant uptake of that, including in the last quarter of last year, where install numbers have basically moved to a vertical position.
Minister Willis, six blokes on their way to Australia, and turn around they're not going to Australia because high, but they'll say UK is basically similar. Have you had any briefings on what happened there and if that had any efficiency?
Well, first to say that hasn't happened with any ships coming to New Zealand, but that is one of the things that we are watching for that would be a sign that we might have future supply disruption. In Australia's case, I'm advised our officials have engaged with the Australians about that, that represents 6 of about 81 ships that they would expect to be coming in, so it is actually a small proportion of their overall ships. Some of those are actually deferred rather than cancelled, so they're somewhat delayed. What we can expect is with the crunch that's on with the Strait of Hormuz, the extra tankers that are around other ports in the world, that there may be delays in shipments, and that shouldn't always be taken as a sign that there will be supply shortages, but that we can expect some delays in the supply chain.
Given Australia has experienced this, and Australia is, can usually outbid us in most things, can we expect a similar thing to happen in New Zealand?
Well, Australia's in quite a different position from New Zealand. For one, they have lower minimum reserve requirements for their fuel companies. We require fuel companies in New Zealand to hold more fuel in reserve than the Australians do. So in some senses that puts us in a stronger position. It's also the case that Australia source a lot of their fuel from China. That is not the case for New Zealand, and I'd note that China has been one of the countries to move to some export controls to prioritise domestic use of fuel. So the Australians are exposed to that in a way that New Zealand isn't.
Have you received all the advice around any potential demand-side measures that might impact situations like this?
Yeah, as I've said previously, our focus is on the supply side. Ultimately, we want to get enough fuel coming into New Zealand that we can keep fueling this economy and growing this economy. And so that's why we're focused on diplomacy, on fuel specifications, on alternative sources of supply. As part of the fuel plan, which we published in 2024, that anticipated that if you did think there was going to be significant disruption and you had signs that was coming, then there could be a case for some measures to moderate demand. But what I'd observe is Kiwis are already doing it. I know that New Zealand households are really feeling that pain at the pump. It's expensive right now. And so what Auckland Transport reported last week was the biggest day of public transport usage in 7 years. And I think that's Kiwis deciding, actually, let's catch the bus today, it'll be cheaper than taking the car. We're also seeing reports of New Zealanders choosing to do a carpool, choosing to reduce their own travel. So I just note that Kiwis are making those choices even without me telling them to.
On the other hand, though, we are seeing things go dry around the country. That's indicating that demand is going up. So have you received the advice around potential measures to
Yeah, so what the fuel companies have shared with us is that they are experiencing some people wanting to go and fill up more regularly. And that's why we've been assuring people you don't have to worry that we're going to run out of fuel overall as a country. We've got plenty. We've got 7 weeks of supply either here or on its way. But it is the case that in some petrol stations, depending on how competitive the price is on a particular day, we are seeing that they are being used up more quickly. The fuel companies are ready to make sure that they can be topped up again. So if a station runs dry, it can be topped up. And ultimately, New Zealanders are making their own decisions about when they fill their tanks, but it doesn't have an overall impact on the supply of fuel available in New Zealand.
And last week you were saying that the potential, should you need it, measure to help people around cross-border tax transfer system. Is there any other information you can give us about what sort of things you're looking at?
Look, as I've said, my focus is on workers. I'm worried about those squeezed people in the middle. They don't get a benefit. They go to work each day. They try and put enough money in their bank account that they can feed their family and fill up their car. And I'm really concerned about those lower income working families who've got kids, they've got big outgoings, and when it costs $30 more, $40 more to fill up their tank, that really bites. So we're looking at proposals which would target them. We're also being really careful about how we do it, because I know that many Kiwis are hurting right now with the higher price of fuel. But if I was to put a huge scheme in place to help every Kiwi, the risk would be that would drive up overall inflation, create massive price increases across the economy, put us into a vicious spiral. I'm also really conscious that I have to look after New Zealand's financial position right now. We received a warning from the Fitch credit rating agency over the weekend saying that they're watching New Zealand carefully. We borrow a lot of money from the world. Global interest rates are rising. We need to keep our books in order and keep this country resilient in what is clearly a more unstable world. So, you know, I just want to be blunt with people. I'm not going to be able to relieve all of the pain at the pump being caused by conflict in the Middle East, but we are looking at judicious, temporary, targeted measures to help those workers and lower income families who might be worst affected.
Very briefly on another topic, RNZ research poll out this morning, 30.8 nationals.
It's another poll, it's another number, it's different from the last number you asked me about.
Minister Bishop, a few weeks ago, just before Iran was really heating up into fuel, you said you were totally committed, this government was totally committed to the fuel prices, fuel tax rises to the extent they were needed to carry out the transport plan, that you've written the transport plan with those fuel tax rises in mind. Do you stand now that committed?
Well, we are working our way through our transport commitments, and clearly there's been a material change in the situation in the last few weeks, and so I think you have to reassess commitments in light of changed situations. That's the plan at the moment, and when that plan changes we'll tell you, but clearly the fuel price increases that New Zealanders are experiencing each and every day at the pump are prompting reassessments of lots of things inside government, and I think you can expect that to continue.
They would drive up construction costs as well, obviously, fuel price increases, which don't go up. Whereas the actual amount of money you fuel taxes is going up. Given that, does that mean that are you considering cancelling some of those roads or scaling them back?
Well, you've made the point yourself. Diesel is a major input into construction of roads and also road maintenance, by the way, around the country. It's also, by the way, a major component of the cost of public transport. Sometimes people forget about the costs that flow through to public transport. Around 20% of our bus fleet is electric, 80% is diesel. And diesel is the fuel that we are actually the most worried about from a security point of view, from a fuel security point of view, and in terms of price. So those costs will flow through to public transport operators. Now you're seeing, as Nicola says, you're seeing people increasingly look at public transport, and I think you're going to see that continue. But there will be flow-on costs for public transport operators as well. So I'm working with NZTA, and in fact I've got a meeting with all of the public transport authorities this morning in a couple of hours to go through what they're seeing, what the impacts are on them, what contingency planning they've got in place for capacity increases that may or may not be happening. So we've just got to work our way through all of that stuff. It's a very dynamic environment, and we're looking at all of those issues.
On the interior, could you defer or cancel roads, given you said things are
We've just got to see the impact. We're in the early days of this. We've just got to see the impact. There will be increased costs to diesel that will flow through to public transport, but also road construction. There's also, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, there is also a revenue impact because as fewer people drive, and fewer people fill up the car because of price, and price signal works in a way that prices often do, which is high prices moderate demand. That has a flow-on impact in terms of revenue into the National Land Transport Fund as well, because despite what some people think, the fuel tax excise duty on petrol is a flat rate, it's not a percentage. So as the price rises, the government is not taking more money off people in terms of fuel tax, it's a flat rate. And as fewer people drive and fewer litres of petrol are bought, there is less revenue going into the National Land Transport Fund. So we're being crunched at both ends, all of which is to say it's a gnarly set of circumstances. It's not something that we caused, or it's not something we wanted, but as a responsible, serious, sensible government, we will deal with it.
And sorry, just lastly, you mentioned public transport. Can you commit now that public transport won't get more expensive because the increased fares and rises, given that it's the alternative for people now?
We're just going to work our way through these issues. As I say, I'm meeting with the public transport authorities this morning, and we're just going to work out what the impacts are on them in terms of increased costs, and we've got to work out what the potential impact is in terms of capacity on them as well. So we're just going to work our way through that. But clearly we want public transport to be an alternative for New Zealanders, because when they're faced with the choice between filling the car up or getting the bus or the train or indeed the ferry or other forms of public transport, then they look at that and public transport is a viable alternative for them.
We spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday and today. He said they would work with you to make public transport free and help
Well, exactly as the Minister of Transport just said, our focus is on making sure there's enough public transport for New Zealanders making that choice. That's why he's meeting with the public transport authorities today to talk to them about having enough capacity on our buses and our trains. It's very clear that people are making that choice in higher numbers because we already put hundreds of millions of dollars of government subsidy every year into public transport. That's been a commitment from this government. It's a commitment that we will continue, but we've got to make sure that we get those dollars helping the most people.
Net favorability for Christopher Luxon is down at -21. Do all of you have confidence in your leader and can all of you rule out a run for leadership?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks.